anthropology. For example, he questioned the assumption that Indian culture was a barrier to development and thus a burden for the US. Instead, Tax suggested that the essence of the anthropological encounter should be dialogue with the other, not conversion, a perspective that brought a relational perspective to anthropological practice. In 1957, Tax founded the journal Current Anthropology to promote anthropology as an international discipline, serving as its editor for many years. He wrote, and I quote, "In 1952, my attention turned to anthropology as it had developed in the rest of the world. And since then, problems of, quote, world anthropology became central to my interests. It was no coincidence that beginning in 1948, I was also into a new approach to ways in which anthropology could help in the process of decolonization," end quote. Tax did not confine his anthropological practice to the US. He taught in Mexico, and he took many students to do fieldwork in Guatemala, where his research was able to prove that peasants do make rational decisions regarding the allocation of resources, thus countering the view, common then, that considered local practices as barriers to development. He inspired anthropological dialogue across the globe, a practice I tried to emulate by co-founding global SfAA and drawing applied anthropologists from the South to publish in journals in the North. My career was particularly influenced by two themes of concern to Sol Tax. One theme was the grounding of professional ethics in the anthropologist-study-population relationship. The second theme was an awareness of the impact of political economy on anthropological careers. As an anthropology student at the Universidad de Buenos Aires in Argentina during the 1960s, I participated in an interdisciplinary research project that explored changes in maize cultivation in a peasant village located on the border with Bolivia. We were archaeologists in the morning, social anthropologists in the afternoon, and temporary residents of the village in the evening. That fieldwork experience inspired me to move to the US to study peasantry with Eric Wolf, then at the City University of New York, with a plan of returning to the research site to conduct doctoral dissertation research. But by the late 1970s, a military dictatorship installed in Argentina had branded peasants enemies, communists, supporters of guerrilla warfare. So my initial fieldwork plans short aborted. I faced a more permanent stay in the US and a quick change of dissertation topic closer to my new home. I lived then a few blocks from Fifth Avenue in Manhattan and often took my two young sons to watch ethnic groups parade in rituals of cultural pluralism. Emulating the Irish, Puerto Ricans were starting to stage their parade, which became my entry point to understand the politicization of Puerto Rican ethnicity, and that for my dissertation. The research process ran parallel to my own acculturation to New York, where I was white, yet South American, Hispanic, yet not yet Latino, because I wasn't born in the US, an immigrant, yet middle class, that's not matching the public imaginary of the immigrant as poor and undocumented. It was in the streets of New York that I became an applied anthropologist, as I learned the value of drawing on other disciplines to understand an issue. For my dissertation, I drew from political science to link the Puerto Rican parade to the politics of state-funded community development projects. I worked with sociologists and urban planners at Columbia University researching homelessness in a Dominican immigrant neighborhood. A postdoctoral fellowship from the National Institutes of Mental Health helped me ground my interest on immigrant acculturation as a health issue when I became a fellow of the Mount Sinai School of Medicine. It was during walks in East Harlem, located behind my office, that I realized that my dissertation interlocutors were then aging in place in an urban enclave they called El Barrio. By then, I had been hired as an assistant professor by the Department of Community Medicine at the Mount Sinai School of Medicine, with a secondary appointment with the Department of Geriatrics and Adult Development. So I designed a project to understand immigrant aging and health, funded by the National Institute on Aging, which entailed an ethnographic 2-year weekly follow-up of health practices and access to facilities among a sample of aged Cubans and Puerto Ricans. During the weekly visits to their houses, I developed, of course, personal relationships with people. I took them photos and supplies, and they invited me to have rice and beans, or at least coffee. The following vignette recalls Sol Tax's focus on fieldwork ethics. Juan, one of the interlocutors I visited weekly, could not understand the connection between our personal relationship and the project when I announced that I would not be coming back to visit because the project had ended. His surprise taught me a lifelong lesson. It is definitely not ethical to draw somebody close to you to elicit information and then drop the relationship when the project funding is over. So I continued to visit or call on people I had befriended even after I left the area. But this experience also alerted me to other ends the project might have beyond the required report to the National Institute on Aging and producing peer-reviewed publications. An idea presented itself during a bus ride. I took a bus to go to work every morning with a woman whom I eventually befriended. She was the director of education at the Museum of the City of New York, located only 2 blocks from my office at the medical school. One day, I showed her photos I had been taken of indoor and outdoor spaces in East Harlem, and shared with her that the photos had helped me ease the tension embedded in interviewing once eye contact was not involved. She immediately suggested I apply for exhibition space at the museum, and the resulting exhibit, Growing Gold in Spanish Harlem, opened in 1995, and then traveled to the International Union of Ethnological Sciences in Mexico. When I moved to Maryland to work at the Department of Anthropology, University of Maryland, I continued learning about the Latino elderly, this time at another immigrant enclave, Langley Park, where many Salvadorians and Guatemalans lived. By then, hooked on telling stories visually, I welcomed an invitation by the Smithsonian Institution to curate a virtual exhibit comparing the experiences on aging Latino among immigrants in New York and Maryland. What Juan had taught me was still fresh on my mind, so I helped bring over some of the interlocutors from Harlem to DC. Later, aided by a team of enthusiastic students, another exhibit was developed, this time a traveling exhibit consisting of a video and panels on local immigrant experiences. Entitled The Immigrant Experience in Prince George's County, this exhibit was shown at non-governmental and service organizations and shared with local government as a strategy to generate dialogue about the immigration narrative and imaginary. Our team also collaborated with the Smithsonian, and it was also at about that time that I was invited by the American Anthropological Association to join their advisory board for a public education initiative called On the Move, which is currently traveling across the US. All these experiences showed me the disconnect between people's imaginary about the immigrant and the diversity of national and social class among the immigrant population in the US, a topic I also explored in a book to stimulate conversations on immigration. Inspired by Sol Tax, but also based on my own experience as an immigrant in the US, I continue to participate in initiatives that promote a North-South dialogue in the Americas. I believe all modes of anthropological work count as service, whether it is education, research, or what we call service in academia. Concern and empathy for the well-being of the other is implicit in anthropology, so I try to continue practicing anthropology as service after retirement from the University of Maryland. I affiliate with the Social Sciences Institute, Instituto de Desarrollo Económico y Social, and collaborate with non-governmental organizations in Buenos Aires, where I now live. To wrap up, I want to think that my career attempted, if feebly, to honor Sol Tax, as well as my predecessors in receiving this award. Among others, Art Gallagher, Herb Chambers, Sue Ellen Jacobs, Don Stahl, Linda Bennett, Peter Kunstler, Brian Foster, Orita Mir, Stan Hyland, Ryan Nolan, Robert Alvarez. I'm sure I'm forgetting many. I also want to thank my nominators for the award, Lisa Hardy, Christina Gettridge, and Amy Caratini, and the board of directors and its president, Jennifer Weiss, for selecting me. To all of you here today, thanks, because whether you know it or not, you influenced my career immensely, and thanks for listening.